You wake up before the sun does, because the sun won't rise for another few hours, and when it does, it will barely clear the horizon. The air inside the house is thick with smoke and the smell of animals. Outside, the wind is already moving, dragging loose snow across the frozen ground in long white ribbons. Somewhere beyond the walls, ice is forming on stone, on wood, on anything left uncovered overnight. You have chores waiting. The animals need tending. The fire needs feeding. And none of it can wait for warmer weather, because warmer weather is months away. Today, cold like this sends most of us indoors, wrapped in synthetic insulation, heated floors, weatherproof everything. For Viking Age families, living near the Arctic edge of the known world, cold like this wasn't an emergency. It was Tuesday. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how they did it. How a house, a coat, and a herd of animals could turn one of the most hostile climates on Earth into a place where generations of people simply lived. Start with the walls. In most of the world, walls exist to keep weather out. In the Viking Age, especially in the treeless stretches of Iceland and Greenland, walls had a harder job. They had to trap heat inside a building for months at a time, through winds that could strip the warmth out of a room in minutes. The solution was turf. Not a decorative layer. Entire walls built from cut blocks of turf, stacked like bricks, sometimes reaching several feet thick. Archaeologists working sites like Hrísbrú in Iceland have uncovered longhouses with these massive turf and stone walls still traceable in the ground, some enclosing spaces over 20 meters long. Turf isn't just dirt. It's a dense mat of soil and root system, and that density is exactly what makes it work. It insulates the way a heavy blanket insulates, slow and absolute. Combined with a turf-covered roof, a longhouse became something closer to a living structure than a building, packed earth on every side, holding in the heat of a single central hearth for an entire household. At Longhouse Meadows, on the edge of North America, Norse settlers built the same way. Sawed walls, sawed roofs, adapted to a landscape with almost no usable timber. Picture what that meant day to day. A house that felt less like shelter from the cold, and more like the cold simply stopped at the door. No furnace, no fuel shortage crisis. Just a wall thick enough that the Arctic gave up trying to get in. A house that holds heat is only half the system. The other half walks around wearing it. Viking clothing was built in layers, and every layer had a job. Closest to the skin, wool, sometimes linen underneath, breathable, and surprisingly effective even when damp. Wool doesn't just block cold, it keeps insulating even when it's wet, which matters enormously in a climate defined by snow, sweat, and sea spray in equal measure. Over that came heavier garments, thick wool cloaks, tunics, and for outdoor work, fur. Archaeological finds and grave evidence, though fragmentary, consistently point to fur being used exactly where you'd expect. Hoods, cloaks, boot linings, mittens, furs from foxes, bears, and other land animals for warmth. Sealskin, valued specifically for its resistance to water, critical for anyone working near ice or wet snow all day. None of this was random. It was engineering, refined over generations, without a single textbook. A farmer heading out to check on livestock in a whiteout wasn't improvising. He was wearing a system, a breathable base layer, an insulating mid-layer, and a weatherproof outer shell. The same basic logic used in cold weather gear today, built from wool and animal hide instead of synthetic fiber. The materials have changed. The physics never did. Now bring the animals inside. For most Viking farms, cattle, sheep, and horses weren't kept in a separate barn out in the cold. They lived at one end of the very same longhouse the family slept in, a room called the byre, divided from the human living space by a simple wooden partition. This wasn't a compromise born of laziness. It was deliberate thermal engineering. A single cow generates a surprising amount of body heat, and multiply that by an entire winter herd packed into tight stalls, and you get a passive furnace running 24 hours a day, radiating warmth straight through the partition into the family's living quarters, without burning a single extra log. At Borg, on the island of Vestvågøy in northern Norway, archaeologists excavated a Viking Age longhouse where more than half the building was dedicated to exactly this. A byre, wrapped in the same insulating sod walls as the human quarters, animals and people sharing one continuous envelope of heat. It wasn't glamorous. The smell alone would have been overwhelming by modern standards. But the arrangement solved two problems at once. It kept the livestock, the family's entire food and wealth on four legs, alive through months of sub-zero cold, and it kept the humans warm, using heat they didn't have to produce themselves. Nothing was wasted. Not the turf, not the fire, not even the cattle's own warmth. None of this mattered if you couldn't move. A frozen fjord, a snow-covered field, a stretch of ice between farms. In the depths of winter, ordinary distances became obstacles, so the Vikings didn't wait for the ground to clear. They adapted to travel on top of it. For deep snow, they used skis. Skiing wasn't a sport invented for leisure. In Scandinavia, it was already an ancient survival technology by the Viking Age, refined over thousands of years for exactly this purpose, covering ground that would otherwise swallow a person to the waist. For ice, they strapped on skates, carved from the leg bones of horses and cattle, smoothed flat, polished, tied to the shoe with leather thongs. Archaeologists have recovered these bone skates by the hundreds at sites like Birka in Sweden and York in England, evidence of how ordinary and widespread this technology really was. Push off with a spiked pole, and a frozen river stopped being a barrier. It became a road. Picture the reality behind that. A farmer at dawn, strapping bone to his boots, gliding across ice that could kill him if it cracked, just to reach the livestock, the neighbor, the firewood. No emergency services. No weather warning on a screen, just judgment, built from a lifetime of reading ice and snow like a language. This wasn't extreme sport. It was Tuesday's commute, and getting it wrong could be the last mistake you ever made. None of what you just saw was luck. It wasn't one clever trick or one brilliant winter. It was a system, a house built to trap heat, clothing built to layer it, animals built into the architecture itself, and bodies trained to move across ice and snow without a second thought. And none of it existed at the start. It was built slowly, failure by failure, across generations, who had no textbook to follow, only the people before them, and the cold that never once gave them a season off. That's the part worth sitting with. Survival like this isn't a single moment of heroism. It's knowledge, passed down so quietly it stops looking like knowledge at all, and starts looking like just how things are done. If this kind of everyday resilience is what you come here for, hit like and drop a comment. It tells us exactly what to dig into next. And if you've ever wondered what it actually felt like to face the Viking Age at sea instead of on land, we covered that too. Links right there, on the freezing nights when going ashore wasn't even an option. So tell me, of everything you just saw, which one would break you first? The cold house, the cold clothes, or the cold ice under your feet?